Hey, it's the early hours of the 6th of November 2019. The Gunpowder Plot's been on my mind, and fittingly, I'm watching V for Vendetta. So I want to do a bit of a review of that film before I go into that, because there are a few things I want to say about this film. Unfortunately, there was some news on MSN News that in St Helens, Merseyside, a bunch of yobs attacked the fire brigade as a semi-riot broke out over a bonfire night event. You know, these attacks on the emergency services, the police, the fire brigade, it's appalling. And it's just a sign of getting into, it's like the case I mentioned the other day from Blackpool. Just wanton thuggery in this country that really is unacceptable. I mean, the police have the power of arrest, but what can firefighters do? You know, they're there to tackle a fire or arson. These heroes shouldn't be targeted by yobs, and that's yet another reminder of why we need much tougher sentences, much tougher deterrence. Anyway, I want to talk about V for Vendetta because it is obviously fitting to this event. We're now in the 414th anniversary of the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. Very loosely speaking, I don't want to give a history lesson here, but if you're not from the UK, this was an event in 1605 when a group of young Catholic men, led by William Catesby, not by Guy Fawkes, I'll explain that in a second, tried to blow up Parliament with the King James VI first. He had both titles. He was King James VI of Scotland, King James I of England, inside. And had this succeeded, it would have resulted in a mass casualty incident, because not only would the King and his ministers have been killed, it would have caused significant damage to the vicinity. It was worked out, in fact, about 10 years ago, the guy from Top Gear, Hammond, I forget his first name, he done a show kind of showing what this would have been like. They actually reconstructed Parliament and blew it up in the countryside. Now, bearing in mind, at the time all the buildings in London were made of wood, it probably would have caused fires in the vicinity, would have been a mass casualty attack. And, innocent civilians would have been killed along with the King. My stance on the Gunpowder Plot is always that, firstly, absolute monarchy I consider dictatorship, so there is that, and the way they met their ends was pretty gruesome. Being hung, drawn and quartered, it was pretty savage, but they were planning a mass casualty attack, so it's one of those things. How do we perceive something with the passage of time? How do we introduce modern morals to the standards of that time? Anyway, I'm just going to read out the first few paragraphs of the Wikipedia article and then get into my own thoughts. V for Vendetta is a 2005 dystopian political thriller film directed by James McTeague, who's an Australian director, and written by the Wachowskis. Based on the 1988 DC Vertigo Comics limited series of the same name by Alan Moore and David Lloyd, the film is set in an alternative future where a Nordic supremacist and neo-fascist totalitarian regime has subjugated the United Kingdom. Hugo Weaving portrays V, an anarchist freedom fighter who attempts to ignite a revolution through elaborate terrorist acts, and Natalie Portman plays Evie, a young working-class woman caught up in V's mission, while Stephen Ray portrays a detective leading a desperate quest to stop V. The film was originally scheduled for release by Warner Brothers on November the 4th, 2005, a day before the 400th anniversary of the actual event, but was delayed. It opened on March 17th, 2006 to positive reviews and was a box office success. Alan Moore was not satisfied with adaptations of his previous works from Hell and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and didn't attend and didn't want to be credited. V for Vendetta has been seen by many political groups as an allegory of oppression by government. Libertarians and anarchists have used it to promote their beliefs. David Lloyd stated, "The Guy Fawkes mask has now become a common brand and a convenient placard to use in protest against tyranny, and I'm happy with people using it. It seems quite unique, an icon of popular culture being used this way." As a film, it could be seen as an average film. I mean, it was successful, but it wasn't massive. Yet the influence that it has in terms of that mask is profound. I mean, for the last 15 years, that mask has been used all over the world by probably hundreds of thousands of people. I'm assuming many of them don't even know the background to it about Guy Fawkes and about the Gunpowder Plot. Guy Fawkes, by the way, was a hired hand. He wasn't the conspiracy leader. It's just that he got caught and he was the gunpowder expert, but it was William Catesby who was the conspiracy leader. So maybe we should call it William Catesby Night, but I guess that just doesn't have the same ring. By the way, there's also supporting roles. Stephen Fry plays, John Hurt plays High Chancellor Adam Sutler, the late John Hurt, great actor. Stephen Fry plays Gordon Dietrich, a closeted homosexual and talk show comedy host. Bear in mind, this is a totalitarian state where homosexuality is illegal. Tim Pigott-Smith plays Peter Creedy, North Fire's party leader and the head of Britain's secret police known as the Finger, which is sort of a thuggish Gestapo-like organisation. Roger Allen plays Louis Prothero, the voice of London, who's a propagandist for North Fire, kind of Goebbels-like figure. There's a lot of backstory to it. It's quite a complex screenplay, so I'm not going to get into all the details, but suffice to say it's about this totalitarian fascist Britain. And the backstory is that a lot of, it focuses on a lot of themes like homophobia, racism, anti-immigration, and a lot of that is seen in the rhetoric of Sutler and Louis Prothero, played by Roger Allen. Now, I always got a strong impression the film had a left-wing tilt to it, and some critics have even accused it of being sympathetic to terrorism. As a moral character, towards the end of the film, questions start to be raised against V, and one has to bear in mind there's a bit that kind of gets on my nerves where his group kind of interrupt the broadcasting and all these families are glued to their TVs, and the little girl goes, "What a load of bollocks," when the normal transmission returns. I thought that was just a bit cringy. It was a bit... That's not how people would respond to that sort of broadcast. Interestingly enough, it was screened in China, and you would think, being a totalitarian state, the Chinese censors would have a big problem with this film, but they didn't. They just let it be played unsanctioned. So, I mean, uncensored. So, I can only suspect that's because it was set in Britain. If it was set in China, they'd have a very different point of view. I think the film definitely has a left-wing bias, and there is one thing that I really take issue with. One of the themes that's addressed in the totalitarianism of the state is so-called Islamophobia. Now, the regressive left, and I don't know the politics of James McTeague. I've some idea about the politics of the Wachowskis. I know they've kind of experimented with anarchist ideas, but this idea of, the Muslims and the homosexuals, so I'm putting them all in Islam. Well, what about homophobic Islamism? I mean, the problem with a film like this is it oversimplifies the culture wars and it oversimplifies the world in which we live. I mean, it's useful in terms of presenting a lot of the basic nature of totalitarian states, but regressive leftists have a lot to say about Christian fundamentalism and right-wingers in the West, but they have very little to say about the totalitarianism of Islam. And this film that's a pretty glaring point. When they just say, homophobia and Islamophobia, well, there's an obvious contradiction there, because you will find few ideologies more vociferously homophobic than Islamist states. So that's kind of a bit of a bone I have to pick with the notion of the film. I also think it does borderline glorify terrorism because it portrays V as a hero. The makers have denied this. They say he's just a crazy guy who kind of represents dissent. Well, they haven't used those words, but defenders of the film have. I don't know. I think it's skirting a line between accurately showing the dangers of totalitarianism and not thinking for oneself, but also, to me, it is getting on the fringes of kind of glorifying V as a character. Now, the interesting thing is, whilst that mask has certainly been used by the left-wing protesters, and it's been used by Anonymous, it's also, the whole Guy Fawkes thing is also being used by the right. I mean, there's a conservative think tank, or rather a conservative website, Guido Fawkes, that's conservative. So it's interesting, whereas the red flag is obviously associated with the left, and something like the Statue of Liberty is maybe more associated with the right, or at least pro-Democrats. There is something about this film there's something about the Guy Fawkes symbol that seems to sort of cross over both divides. I'd say it's more left-wing. I mean, it's used all over the world. Right now, young Hong Kongers are using it in defiance of the mask ban there. Although the totalitarianism they're opposing is Chinese communism. In this film, obviously, it's a fascist Britain. The film is entertaining. It's definitely it's a film you wouldn't forget. It's entertaining in terms of the dialogue, in terms of the action, and strong performances, I might say. But I do have a bit of a problem with the obvious left-wing overtones coming through, and with that some of the left-wing hypocrisies, especially regarding ignoring the homophobia of Islamism. I mean, the left have this thing about Islamophobia. As far as I'm concerned, Islamophobia is a term used to stifle legitimate criticism of Islam. Also, the film was released in the same year as the London bombings. Now, I don't personally believe that films should be censored purely out of sensitivity, but when the film is sending out a message that, hey, this guy is committing terrorist attacks for the greater good, in the same year that London experienced its worst terrorist attack, that's you could see why there'd be controversy there. There is definitely an overwhelming narrative in the film that is pro-anarchy and maybe not pro-terrorism, because it's in the context of opposing a totalitarian state. But I would say, for me personally, as an entertaining escapist film, it's good. As a narrative, it has problems. I mean, I don't know how it corresponds to the graphic novel. I haven't read the graphic novel. Anarchists like the novel. They believe the film didn't go far enough to promote in fact, they've argued that it focused too much on violence and not enough on the message. But it has been profoundly influential if we consider the mask from the film has been used by hundreds of thousands of people all over the world. And yet the film isn't like, it's not on the sort of scale of a Gladiator or a Gone with the Wind or a Titanic. It's not a massive film. Budget of 54 million, box office 132 million. We can call it average in terms of its initial impact, but its impact since then has been profound. Nevertheless, it is a memorable film, and there are some important messages. I just think that there is a left-wing and anarchist bias. I mean, there is little exploration in the film about moral questions against V. For example, when he kind of takes over the TV station, what about the innocent workers who are just low-level workers who are petrified? So I'm not sure if it goes far enough in showing the grey area